Hey, Cubs Nation, we're back. We're better than ever. We're having a great conversation today with the man, the legend himself from Marquee Network, Tony Andracki. Tony, how you feeling, man?
Hey, I'm doing great. How are you?
Man, we're doing okay. We had an early morning today. We had an episode scheduled for 9 a.m., which was beautiful timing because around 8:50, 8:55, we got the news that Justin Turner is officially a Chicago Cub. Now, you and I have made jokes about this in the past, probably over a year ago, about him being a Cubs killer. So to have him on the north side now, just breaking into the episode right away, how do you feel about Turner now in a Cubs uniform?
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting. I am still waiting to kind of hear and see like how they plan on working him in terms of like getting somewhat regular playing time. I mean, a guy for a reported 6 million plus salary, like you're not anticipating that he's only going to play 40 games a year. So where he fits, I don't know. He doesn't really play third base anymore. He has 13 combined games at third base over the last 2 seasons. So even though he played that a bunch in his career and the Cubs have an opening there, I'm not anticipating him to be over there much at all. He's kind of like an emergency option and like a backup to the backup, right? Like his signing doesn't mean Matt Shaw suddenly isn't going to play a bunch. So, but right now, I mean, Michael Busch is a guy that Cubs really believe in. They believe that he doesn't even necessarily need a platoon other side because they believe that as a left-handed hitter, he can face lefties pretty well. They think he's a future Gold Glover at first base as well. So that's a position, obviously, that Turner's played a bunch of recently. And then DH, right now the Cubs have 4 outfielders, which is why Seiya Suzuki was DHing and seen as the regular DH going into this year. But you got Kyle Tucker, Ian Happ, PCA, who are playing in right, left, and center respectively. You're not going to sit those guys unless there's an injury or something really pops up. And same with Seiya. I mean, he's your probably second best bat in the lineup. So you want him in there all the time. So how this all works, I don't know. That's kind of like that being said, like it's a good problem to have. It's a good problem to have a guy who has like a career 821 OPS against both righties and lefties out there, and a guy who knows how to hit, who has proven veteran experience, who knows how to win too. He's been around a ton of winning in his time. Won the World Series with the Dodgers in 2020. Like this guy can bring a lot to the table. That veteran leadership will help, and also like injuries will happen, ineffectiveness will happen. And the Cubs did not have a backup option at all at first base behind Michael Busch. So if a sophomore slump came, if he got banged up at all, they didn't really have an option. They had John Birdie, who the only time John Birdie's ever played first base was in the playoffs last year for the Yankees, and he got a crash course from our old friend Anthony Rizzo. So they didn't really have like a good option. Nobody in the minors too that was like knocking at the door to come up. So it's a good move overall for the Cubs. It adds their depth. And it raises their floor, which is kind of what the key to what they've done this offseason is. They've raised their floor and they've added an incredible amount of depth to this roster.
Yeah, I love it. And I think really for me, the move in itself, obviously when we talk about him, a 737 OPS for a bench player is amazing, especially when last year we're looking at guys like Patrick Wisdom, who was just a walking K in certain points of the season, and then Nick Madrigal, who just couldn't really figure it out in Chicago on the north or the south side. But I think just having him in the clubhouse is going to be so important for a guy like Matt Shaw. Like you mentioned, hasn't been playing third base as much. If I'm not mistaken, I forgot exactly where I saw it. He had the slowest exit velocity from any third baseman from third to first in the entire league over the last couple of years. So definitely not an issue for Matt Shaw whatsoever. Like we did talk about potentially being an issue if Alex Bregman were to come in. And we're going to do an entire different podcast in a couple of days for all the Red Sox fans on the network. Trouble in paradise with Devers. I know Bregman's trying to play nice right now, but there's a lot of things going on. So it's interesting to me to see that situation unfold in Boston. But in Chicago, this raises a lot of questions for me for different reasons. I think right now the big thing is Nico Horner and his availability. We always talk about the best ability being availability. It's kind of just a corny joke at this point, but it is the truth. So right now for you, getting to see Nico Horner, throughout social media and everywhere, Marquee's posting a bunch of his workouts. Where are you at with him? And do you think we see him at all in spring training?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if we see him, maybe at some point in one of these exhibition games. But I don't know, like if he's going to end up going to Japan with the team, if he travels there and maybe he travels and doesn't play. I really don't know exactly what to expect from Nico. Getting over like the broken hand was one thing last year. I mean, that takes is easily solved in the offseason. But when you undergo a flexor tendon surgery, I mean, this is essentially the infielder's version of Tommy John, right? Like, you're not going to be throwing 150 pitches or even 100 pitches, including warmups and stuff, but you are going to have to throw from second base. And he wants to be able to go out there and play shortstop if need be as well. If Dansby ever needed a day off or anything, Nico prides himself on being able to shift over and be the Cubs' backup shortstop. And you need to be able to throw, and you need to be able to throw at your maximum capacity to do so. So the Cubs definitely be careful. Nico will be careful too, because they understand that even after Japan, there's 160 games to be played. Like they don't want to make a move and rush him back and have him, have to take a day off after every game playing or whatever. Like they want him to come back and be able to play every day, 160 or 140 or 130, whatever it ends up looking like. They want him to be able to play every day all at once. So I do think they'll be conservative, and I think we'll probably see that conservative approach mean that maybe he doesn't get a ton of time in spring training. But then again, things change. He's already like out on the field. He's going through his throwing progression. It's just that if we look, transport literally a month from now, right? Like the Cubs will be playing a game, so a regular season game, to a guy who can't throw right now on the field be playing in that game. I don't necessarily see it, but crazier things have happened.
Yeah, without a doubt. And I think the big question that kind of all Cubs fans were going through this offseason was what's going to happen with Nico Horner. Now, I myself, Nico Suave, has been a huge fan in the Hughes household, and even to the fact to where I'm repping his City Connect jersey that is obviously like $200. I got it last opening day. I'm looking at it like, man, there's no way I'm about to lose out on this jersey after a year of only having it. But now without Alex Bregman in the conversation, do you think the Nico Horner trade talks are going to kind of die down? Obviously, the injury played a big role to why he wasn't moved this offseason if they were going to move him. But now that you have a situation where you have Matt Shaw on his rookie year, presumably if you were to trade Nico Horner, you're guessing that James Triantos is going to be your starting second baseman. So you got two rookies in that infield. I just don't think it's in the best benefit for the Chicago Cubs moving forward. Do you think with Matt Shaw being here every day, that keeps Nico here for at least another year?
Yeah, that's where I would bet now. Maybe that would change, if like they had an option to like go out and find a way to upgrade, and they felt really confident about moving Shaw to second base. Maybe they trade a guy like Nico before the deadline. I don't see that, right? Like, I don't think the Cubs want to do that either. I think the whole idea behind trading Nico, if you were going to do it, was one, to shed salary, which you're not going to really worry too much about in season in a year where the Cubs are clearly trying to go for it. And, they have one guaranteed year of Kyle Tucker. Like, they're going all in, or as close to all in as you can kind of say for the Cubs, like in 2025 here. So I don't think that makes a ton of sense from the salary perspective. The other end would be to get more power in the lineup. But if you have Matt Shaw at third base, I mean, you feel pretty good about it. If he's playing well and you feel confident enough of him moving to second base, or you feel confident about James Triantos in the minors, coming up to the big leagues and playing second base, then yeah, maybe. But like, the Cubs really value Nico Horner. They know what he provides. He's kind of a table setter to that lineup, whether he's leading off or not. He's a fantastic base runner and a phenomenal fielder. And like, he's a guy that the players really like in the clubhouse as well. He has this kind of quiet leadership and sets a good model for the team. He's very team oriented, very focused on winning. And like, all of that is like, you don't just trade a guy like that for nothing. And, I don't see a move like that happening in season. If it happens, I would see it happening like after the year. But even then he only has 1 year left on his deal. So I'm not sure exactly kind of what you would get for him. And as you said, Mike, like, what do you do? Do you open it for James Triantos next year? And, say everything goes great with Matt Shaw this year at third base. That's awesome. But then you're kind of in the next boat with James Triantos next year. Like, would you feel super confident enough to know that Matt Shaw will take a step forward, or at least, have the good performance, let's say, that he has this year in 2026, and then feel good about handing the reins of second base over to Triantos? These are question marks that like I can't answer right now, and I don't know, but that's where I'm kind of like leaning towards maybe the Cubs do just end up keeping Nico through the remainder of his contract, despite all the trade rumors.
Yeah, for sure. And I think for me, especially covering the team down in Iowa for as long as I have, I think a spitting image of Nico Horner is James Triantos. And that's kind of the opportunity that I was talking to you about before the show for me, where I think if Nico does miss the majority of spring training, I mean, this opens up the room for James Triantos to show, hey, I can play second base every single day at an elite level or above average level defensively. And as a hitter, I mean, this is a guy who's going to give you a 285 to 300 average every single year. That's why I think him and Nico are so similar. There's not a lot of thump and pop in the bat, but they're definitely going to get on base. And I think that's what's going to be most important. So for James Triantos to potentially be one of those trade pieces, we've talked about it a lot on the pod about how this outfield group just keeps getting more and more crowded. Like we thought 2016, the group was crowded. Like this is 10 times more than that, especially with the no trade clauses for Seiya. Obviously you're not getting rid of Tuck unless he wants out. And then obviously Ian Happ as well. So I think for me, this spring really could be the spring of James Triantos. Where do you see him fitting in all of this? And with the Cubs still having a little bit of money to play with, kind of a two-part question, could you see them moving Triantos and some other pieces to get another starter in the room?
Like a starter meaning starting pitcher or?
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I kind of get the vibe that they're done on the starter front, with that in Matthew Boyd and Colin Ray, and they still have, with all those guys, Javier Assad doesn't have an option right now, or meaning like he can go down the minors, but like he doesn't have a spot in the rotation. And then, they just signed Chris Flex into a minor league deal as well, who pitched, he was pretty solid for the White Sox last year. I mean, he can eat innings. He's a good veteran guy. And then, you got Cade Horton, you got Ben Brown, you got some of these other guys, Jordan Wicks as well. So I feel like, I get the vibe that they're done on the starting pitcher front. With Triantos, I don't see the Cubs trading him this spring. I mean, trades in March and even February, I'm just kind of talking about spring training in general, are pretty rare because at this point, like everybody's feels pretty good about where their roster's at, and you supplement with some of these free agent signings like Justin Turner, but you don't see a ton of big trades at this point in the season because those are more reserved for trade deadline or like firmly in the off season. So I think Triantos will be here to stay for this season. Where he kind of fits in, I don't know. Maybe we see him in the big leagues this year, maybe we don't. It kind of depends on what else is around him. But I know the Cubs have added to that infield depth, like you were talking about earlier with Wisdom and Madrigal. Those guys are gone, but the Cubs have signed John Birdie and Vidal Brujan right now. They traded for Matt Mervis and got him from the Marlins. Nicky Lopez, the former White Sox as well. He's here.
Naperville legend.
Naperville legend, fine. Chicagoland legend. He's around, and Matt Shaw can play multiple positions. I think they have options, and they also have Gage Workman, the Rule 5 pick that they've kept on the 40 man, and they have to keep on the 26 man roster, but they've done it all winter so far. They must really like him, and they see the big left-handed bat as a guy who can either factor in at third or maybe second, where he's played a little bit in the minors too. So I think all those guys will kind of get a shot before Triantos, but you never know. Maybe it is the spring of James Triantos, and then we see an opportunity for him. I would lean towards one of those other guys playing second if Nico's not ready to start the year, and maybe like mid-season if an injury comes up that Triantos gets a shot.
Yeah, for sure. I like it. I think there's a lot of different ways it can go for guys like Alcantara, guys like Triantos, Owen Casey, who I know Owen's just biting at the bit to get into the bigs because he has played way too many games in AAA. For me, I think the kid's more than ready. But I, kind of pivoting to that next conversation about the front office more so than the farm. We saw the Cubs pivot from Bregman to Turner, and we've heard it all off season long. There's the ongoing joke that the Cubs' new slogan is going to be breaking even. We've seen obvious shirts and all these other people making jokes about it. And I'm sure if Tom could go back in time and switch 3 things that ever happened in the history of the world, making that statement would probably be one of them. But for you right now, the state of Kyle Tucker, I think, is kind of the more interesting one when it comes to the Bregman contract, especially with Theo Epstein helping out in Boston, doing his thing over there with FSG and really just helping contribute to getting that contract done. It was a slight overpay. $40 million a year is a lot for Bregman at this point in time. But you look at a guy like Kyle Tucker, who after this season could kind of have a similar year that Juan Soto had last year if he stays healthy. Do you think the Cubs are already kind of out of that conversation if Tucker ends up getting $500-600 million offers?
No, I don't think they're out of that conversation, but I think it's a fair question. I mean, I didn't expect the Cubs to sign Juan Soto this past offseason, but If you had asked me a year ago, would they be in the market on Juan Soto? And I would have said, yeah, absolutely. Like, I think they would be interested. So I was maybe, a little surprised that they kind of ruled themselves out of that right away. And, I understand how hard it is. Obviously, he ended up getting, a ton of money, and same with Shohei the offseason prior. But yeah, I don't see the Cubs being out of the Kyle Tucker sweepstakes. I think that they'll be in it. They have even more financial flexibility going into next offseason as of right now than they did like going into this offseason. So they should be in a good spot. They've never handed out a $200 million contract. I could see Kyle Tucker being the guy that they really want to do that for, because they'll see this year, and they already know and appreciate everything he's done. But I think this year will be really interesting to see, because you'll get an up close look at one of the most underrated, if not the most underrated MLB player in the game. I mean, he's always been overshadowed by Yordan Alvarez or Bregman or Jose Altuve or whoever in Houston. And he is easily one of the top 10 position players in baseball. MLB Network just ranked him the 14th best player in all of baseball, including pitchers. So he's a legitimate star, and the Cubs will see what he can do. And maybe, understanding the person, having him in the clubhouse, seeing how he plays at Wrigley, interacts with the fan base, the team, etc. Maybe that is the reason that they give a $200 million plus contract. And maybe it's 300, maybe it's 350. Who knows exactly where it'll end up? But yeah, I don't think they'll be out of the running. I think they'll absolutely be in it. Whether they'll land him or not, I truly don't know.
Yeah, I think really it's gonna come down to the money at the end of the day. But I personally myself have a hard time believing the team will go from 184 to 600 mil. It's a really big jump, and it's something we haven't seen before. And like we said, like history's past has showed us throughout all of the guys from the Theo Epstein era to Jed Hoyer era, we kind of missed out on all of them. We talk about the Mike Trouts or the Bryce Harpers or the Shoheis or the Freddie Freemans, Mookie Betts. Like the fact that we weren't really in play legitimately for any of those guys, I think makes a lot of fans question if they really would want to bring back a guy like Kyle Tucker. But I think for me, when it's in your face and you've seen it and it's a product that has success, I think it's really hard to just walk away from it. If Kyle Tucker goes out and hits 35 home runs, 100 RBIs, and wins a Gold Glove in right field, and then you just let him walk and go to the Bronx, where he's probably going to hit 40 bombs there, I think Cubs fans would be really upset. So for you, where is your expectation for Tucker right now? Obviously, season ended really early last year, only played 78 games, but Ian Happ had 25 home runs and over 150. Tucker's right behind him at 78 with 23. So if he has a full healthy season, what are your expectations for him, not only in this ball club, but in the entire league as a MVP candidate?
Yeah, that is my expectation, Mike, is I think he's going to be an MVP candidate in the NL this year. And I think if the Cubs end up where Pacoda's projecting at 90 wins and winning the NL Central or even above that, it's going to be because Kyle Tucker had a star level season, and a season that deems him worthy of being in the NL MVP race. So that is my expectation. I mean, certainly health is a factor. Last year, Wrigley was brutal against left-handed hitters. I mean, Cody Bellinger, Michael Busch are among those that will tell you that. Even Ian Happ himself would tell you that, because it played as the second best pitchers park in all of baseball. I don't think that's going to happen again. I mean, we'll just by virtue of it, we'll see warmer days and the wind will blow out more than it did last year. It's just a really fluky year that you can't translate from one year to the next. So, but yeah, I mean, because Kyle Tucker is a true 5-tool guy, and he hits for a high average. He walks a lot. He has a good arm in the outfield. He's a Gold Glove defender, as you mentioned. Like, obviously the power, good base runner. Like, he's going to do so many things well that if the Cubs are a playoff team, they win the NL Central, I think it's going to be because Kyle Tucker's in the MVP conversation.
I love it. I love it. I think King Tuck in the bleachers and right field, left field will go crazy. I think to me, that's really what it comes down to. I think a lot of people are upset about Cody Bellinger not being a part of this roster, and him and Kyle Tucker coexisting. It just wasn't in the cards. I think when we really talk about what Cody was able to do in 2023 and what that meant for the Cubs in that second half, it's kind of what Kyle Tucker is on a regular basis. It's not going to be a one-half thing. It's going to be throughout an entire 162 game season. Kyle Tucker is going to be very consistent. So I'm excited about it. But we have a couple more for you before we let you out of here. Matt Shaw, you and I joked about it just a few months ago, where I said, well, do you even remember who the Cubs third baseman was in 2014? And it was Mike Olt before Chris Bryant. What are your realistic expectations for the number 19 overall prospect from 2024 right now. Obviously, Chris Bryant set the standard at third base his rookie year. I don't expect the same numbers, but what do you think he could be by the end of 2025?
Yeah, it's a good question, and in some ways, it's like the question of the season. I think the Kyle Tucker question's a bigger aspect of it all, but like Matt Shaw at third, like, does he have the learning curve, and does it happen all this year? I mean, remember Kyle Schwarber came up and was great right away, but then in 2016 got hurt. 2017 he went down to the minors for part of the year, and same with Ian Happ. Like Happ spent a bunch of time. I think there was the 2019 season. He spent 4 months in the minors after being up for 2 full seasons basically prior to that. So just because even if Shaw ends up, going really well this year doesn't mean that he's up here to stay. I think he'll essentially have to like prove himself, year over year, kind of like what I was talking about with Michael Busch before.
Mhm.
But I think the Cubs really believe in Matt Shaw, and they believe that he's a special prospect. Chris Bryant comparisons, I think, would be definitely too tough, so I can't put that on him. But I think he's a guy who's like, he's really athletic. He's like surprisingly athletic in some ways. Like I think he's a good defender. He can handle third base. I think he's really quick on the base pass. I mean, he has like 46 steals or something like that, 159 minor league games. So I think that can be a part of his game. But then it's power too, right? And it's like, can he can put the ball in the seats, but can he make enough contact? Can he hit for a high enough average? Can he keep strikeouts low enough and walk enough to be a truly useful player, and not a guy who's hitting 220 with 20 to 25 bombs and a 300 on base percentage with solid defense at third? Like, that's fine. That's not a terrible player by any means. That's a 1.5 WAR player probably.
Mhm.
But for Matt Shaw to like be the guy that the Cubs really want him to be, I think he needs to like be in that like 2.5 to 3 WAR territory at least eventually. Not putting that on him in his rookie year, but yeah, I think the big thing will be for me. I want to see how he adjusts whenever he is up to major league pitching, and we saw it last year even with like PCA and Miguel Amaya, and they made some adjustments mid-season after a really tough start to the year, and then they hit the ground running and they had fantastic second halves each. So I want to see Matt Shaw kind of go through the same process and see that before I can really determine, like, yeah, he's a part of the team,
Mhm.
a part of the core for the future. Is like, you got to see how a guy adjusts and handles that failure. And there's so many examples of guys where it doesn't work out. Like Matt Mervis wasn't as highly ranked as a prospect, but he was heralded, especially by Cubs fans, as like a guy who was can't miss. And then he came up, struggled 2 separate seasons in a row, and now he's in Florida, and who knows whether we'll see him in the big leagues again, but that happens, and that happens from a lot of guys. So can Shaw be one of the guys that makes the adjustments or not? I think that's really the big question.
Yeah, and for me, the only issue, and I always try to be as positive as possible, is just because the fan in you wants everything to be successful. But the Cubs didn't prepare for a backup for Michael Busch whatsoever. I guess we could say that's Justin Turner now, but at the end of the day, I don't think it really matters because they're so high on what he was able to do in 2024. Whereas with Matt Shaw, you really don't have that certainty. You don't have that tape of, hey, look, he did it at a big league level and he had success. If Shaw was to fail, or maybe let's just say a 2023, 2024 Pete Crow Armstrong type of season where the first half it's just really bad. Do you think that is kind of a question mark or a blemish on the front office because they weren't in on Bregman and they didn't want to go the extra mile just to go out and get him? If we start struggling at third base with Shaw, how fast do you think Cubs fans will start turning on Jed?
I mean, maybe, but like, I don't know. And in that sense, I don't really think Jed deserves any blowback, right? Yeah, they were, even the Red Sox just said out this week that they saw the Cubs as the biggest competitor for Bregman. So I mean, that the Cubs did make a really good offer. Like,
Yeah.
I understand the blowback for sure from fans. They're frustrated by the outcome. They're frustrated that Alex Bregman chose to go somewhere else and another team, quote unquote, outspent the Cubs. But like $30 million a year guaranteed for 4 years for a guy in Bregman, and we don't know the exact, opt outs and structure of it and all that kind of stuff. But like, that's, the Cubs were essentially willing to pay him $30 million at least in 25, and then maybe 26, 27. Like, that's a lot. And like, Jed went to the front office and he talked about how he got Tom and Tom, the Ricketts family to like buy in on going above their budget for a guy like Bregman. So I get if there's blowback. I just personally don't see it that way, and I don't think there should be. I mean, especially because the funny thing is, like, once the Cubs traded Isaac Paredes, then Cubs fans were like, oh, Matt Shaw, there's room for Matt Shaw to play, right? And like, if he fails, then I mean, certainly those same people aren't going to be like, oh, well, I wanted this and it didn't work out that way, because that's reasonable, and the internet's not always reasonable. But like, I just think that this is like a good process overall, right? Like, I believe what Jed and Carter have said is that you want to have a good roster, but you also want to give young guys like the platform and the runway to show up in the big leagues and perform, like PCA carved out a role for himself, or even Miguel Amaya a couple years ago really showed himself well. You want to give those guys there because you keep getting that pipeline. That's what the Dodgers have done. That's why the Dodgers are at this point, is because they've given guys opportunities until, obviously now they're outspending everybody, but like I'm saying, they did that. So I think it's a good process. And the only reason they budged from that is because Alex Bregman was still around on February 10th or whatever day it was that he like actually signed, February 12th. So like that was the only reason they budged. And Bregman was like a star level player, one of the top 5 free agents available. So I don't necessarily know how the blowback is going to go, but I don't think like Jed really kind of deserves that. And just the Cubs in general, like I think they were in there on Bregman for sure. Maybe they could have gone higher. Maybe they should have gone higher. Fans can say all that, and maybe there's some level of fairness to that. But I think really the big thing is like they were in on him. They were willing to offer like a pretty good package for sure. But now they have an opportunity for Matt Shaw, and we can see what he can do. And they certainly have backup plans, as you said, with first base. I mean, they have John Birdie, they have Vidal Brujan, they have Gage Workman, they have Nicky Lopez, they have guys. Even Triantos can slide over there if they believe in him as well. Like, there are options at third base if Shaw is not able to kind of take the job and run with it. Not a Bregman level guy. John Birdie isn't that, but he's a really solid player who's played on some winning teams and been a pretty big part of those teams too.
For sure. And I think that's kind of my damned if you do, damned if you don't question, because Jed, obviously being in the last year of his deal, it's not his fault, but it's always going to go back on Jed, because Tom, no matter what, is going to own this team at the end of the day. Nobody can fire the boss. But that's really where I was at with it. Was kind of like, it's kind of a risky situation right now. But if you do believe in these guys, which I think Jed has every right to, you draft them for a reason, you bring them in for a reason. They've shown you no reason to why they can't develop into that. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. Last question for you though. Who is a prospect that you're most excited to see? Tony, please don't say Matt Shaw. Every single person on this podcast has said Matt Shaw so far. So other than Shaw, who are you most excited to see that maybe most Cubs fans aren't too familiar with?
Yeah, I think it's Moises Ballesteros. To me, is the guy, because I could see him, maybe not as much with like Turner now, but I could see him factoring into the Cubs at some point in the big league level. I mean, in 25. Because he can hit and he is raked at every stop, but he just doesn't really have a position, meaning like in the big leagues. Like, he's played a little bit of first base, but he's short. He's 5'8". He would be like the shortest first baseman in the big leagues if he played over there. He could DH. He could catch. I don't know if they believe yet that he's 21, if they believe that he can catch big league pitching in a playoff race or something like that, or in crucial games at the big league level. So I don't really know where he factors in, but like, when you got Seiya, Justin Turner basically being your DH, on an everyday basis, not as much room for him right now. So I'm unsure of how he would fit, how that would work, but he's a guy that I'm going to watch this spring for sure, because that left-handed bat is real. I know the Cubs absolutely love him as a hitter, and it'd be really interesting just to see how he develops, because, left-handed bats like are obviously hard to come by, but like, a guy like him who can make a lot of contact, show some pop, they just love the bat. And like, it's going to be fun to watch in spring training, face some big league pitching, and then see how things play out, see where the cards lie. Like, maybe if there is an injury to Miguel Amaya or Carson Kelly, he's a guy who catches, twice a week or something like that, and they get as bad in the lineup. But I think that's going to be the most fascinating, is Ballesteros not just this spring, but how the rest of 2025 plays out for him.
I was going to say Kevin Alcantara, but once you made that 5'8" short comment, as a 5'8" man myself, I'm rooting for Moises now. Okay. But man, we appreciate you being here, man. Again, Tony Andracki, you can check him out at the Marquee Network. They're doing amazing things all spring training long. Boots on ground as well. They're doing amazing content. I just saw they were filming some stuff with Kevin earlier today. I saw he's got the Jaguar headband. He's got the Jaguar bat. Last year we had the glove. He's all in on El Jaguar. So I'm really excited about that and just what everybody else is going to be able to do. But we'll be be going live again tomorrow, likely with Mike Powers. Maybe sometime tonight. We're going to be talking about the New York Mets and the Chicago Cubs state. We're going to be really just boots on ground all season long. So make sure you hit that follow button if you haven't already. Until then, this is Mike Hughes, aka the Shy Kid. Until next time, peace.
Give them a shot to do what?